Okay, we were waiting for that. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danielle Snyder. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I am going to be speaking about being your best self at work and through Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. So one of the things that I like to encourage during these conversations is to ask questions. In an ideal world, this would be a little bit more interactive, but since it's a presentation and we have to work with what we have, I am going to pause and answer questions throughout if you guys have any. So I have gotten into the habit of starting these presentations by doing an exercise that helps us ground and come back to the moment, set aside everything else that we have going on to be as present as possible to take in this information. A lot of what our life requires us to do is to be constantly on the move. And what do you think happens if we're constantly on the move and then all of a sudden we stop and try to sit and be present? Well, generally speaking, our brain is going into a million different ways or going a million different paths and thinking about what we have to do after work and, you know, what we have to get at the grocery store and things like that. So we are going to start by doing a quick grounding exercise. And this is actually one of my favorites because it incorporates all of our senses and it's super simple to do. So I want you to set aside your phone, close out your email, and take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold and exhale through your mouth. We're actually going to do that 3 times. So a deep breath in through your nose. Pause. And exhale through your mouth. And a final time together. Inhale through your nose. Hold. And exhale through your mouth. Okay, great. Now we're going to start the grounding exercise. So I want you to look around the room that you're in, and I want you to find 5 things the color green. So I'm sitting near a plant, so I'm thinking plant, picture, nail polish. So I want you guys to do that all on your own. Then I want you to do 4 different things that you can touch. And I actually physically want you to touch it. So my jacket's nice and cozy, my hair, my face, and the table. Three different things you hear. I can hear some trucks outside, my voice. 2 different smells. Well, I have my smoothie bowl over there that I just finished, so I can smell that. And I also smell the plant. And 1 different taste, because I just ate the smoothie bowl. That's going to be my taste. So essentially what we have just done is a quick grounding exercise. The whole process took about 2 minutes, and that helps you from being in your amygdala or brainstem, which this always reminds me of my brainstem, and into your prefrontal cortex. It can help you be more present for this meeting. It will help you be more present really with anything that you're doing, which I think very nicely intertwined with being your best self at work, because that is a specific exercise that you guys can start to practice before you have to have a serious conversation, before you write an email. It can really help ground and focus you. Okay, I am going to share my screen so we can get started on the presentation. Right. Perfect. Okay, as I said, for all of you who are just joining now, my name is Danielle Snyder, and we're going to talk about being your best self at work. So it's kind of interesting, but one of the main ways to be your best self anywhere is to be aware of what you got going on internally. A lot of times what can happen is the people that we struggle most with are those that remind us of our own internal struggles. I'm sorry, we have a question that I can answer later. I just want to make sure I had this. So one of the questions I ask first to anyone who starts to work with me, who is looking at improving dynamics at work or improving relationships outside of work, is what is your self-talk? How do you treat yourself? So I kind of want you guys to pause and consider, what does self-talk have to do with being your best self at work? Well, if we are having any sort of vulnerabilities, that means that anyone who provides us feedback that could be touching on our vulnerabilities may make us respond in a defensive manner. It may, when we are like struggling with our own self-esteem, it is really easy to feel validated in those beliefs when someone gives us feedback, which is what working in an office environment looks like, is, is providing feedback, is having a discussion. It helps us grow. So one of the things that I like to really encourage people to start to do is to be aware of when they are having negative self-talk. We, in the next couple slides, will start to talk about how becoming more aware of the negative self-talk and how to do so and how to reframe in order to improve work culture overall. But it really starts, number one, with you. It starts at understanding and looking at how you feel about yourself. So on the discussion of how we feel about ourselves, that means I got to talk about self-care, which I feel like is definitely a buzzword that's been kind of sprinkled in our lives for the last couple of years. Like, often people are saying like, what's your self-care? And a lot of people are like, well, I don't have a self-care routine, or I don't do any of that stuff. So I kind of like want you guys to ponder in your head, how does self-care relate to being your best self at work? I hope that's what's coming up for you, is that if you're not taking care of yourself, it's really hard to show up at work. It's hard to show up for your family, and it's hard to not feel burnt out. So what does self-care look like? Well, it can be spending time alone, putting yourself first, asking for support, setting boundaries, getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise. Which, as I'm saying this out loud, I'm like getting tired just saying it. So I imagine that, implementing these steps is a lot. But if we are not taking care of our basic needs, it is going to be really hard to feel calm and collected and supported when we go to work. So I'd like you guys to take out a piece of paper, and I want you to write down one thing that you can start including in your days that is self-care. That could be showering before bed. That could be doing that grounding exercise. It could be going for a walk outside. It doesn't have to be a lot. It's just 2 to 3 minutes is a great start. So rather than thinking, oh yeah, like I hear what Danielle's saying, and that's a good idea, I want you to concretely write something down for yourself. I prefer a little Post-it note. And you know what? I stick it right on my computer. So my Post-it note says stretch every 5 minutes, excuse me. Stretch every 45 to an hour. So I just get up and I just kind of stretch and move my body, because sitting for 8 hours straight is not good for me. So that's my self-care. Okay, so this kind of takes me to my next point, which is when we are not mentally in a good space, a lot of times what happens for us is we get stuck in a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is difficult because it doesn't really give us the opportunity to look at challenges or mistakes or struggles as something that we can improve on. Rather, it becomes a defining factor of our lives. So let's say you are struggling to get a project in on time. A growth mindset would be, how can I do better next time? Is there anyone I can ask for help? This is a great opportunity to practice time management better. You still take accountability for what's going on, but you don't let it define who you are as a person. So that would be a growth mindset. A fixed mindset would be, wow, I'm a failure. Why do I even try? I'm going to get fired. This is why people don't want to work with me, or so on and so on. It's kind of that negative spiral. So it's really difficult to have a growth mindset if we are not taking care of ourselves. We're quicker to jump to conclusions. Our emotional regulation is limited when we're not meeting those basic needs. And, that negative self-talk I started to talk about in the beginning is going to be louder. So there's this trickle-down effect. By taking care of ourselves better, we are able to be aware of our thoughts and our negativity. And then that also is intertwined in how we respond to others, how we provide feedback, and how we receive feedback. Because that's what working with other people is. Like, there's always going to be feedback and opportunities. So that kind of brings me to the discussion of feedback. It's interesting. Excuse me. It's interesting because, when I was going to school, one of the things that I had inherently learned is you want to get all A's and as little feedback as possible. What that then internalized for me was that feedback is a negative. But really, feedback is that opportunity for growth and learning, because as humans, we don't know everything. And people have different perspectives, which is why we work on things together as a project, or we ask people for their opinion to help us kind of grow and be stronger as a collective unit rather than as an individual, because no one knows everything. So I want to kind of ask you personally, I should have asked this before I provided what I thought of feedback, but when you hear the word feedback, what is your initial reaction? Just kind of want you to think about that in your head. Sometimes feedback isn't even labeled feedback. It could be something like, hey, Laura, I need to talk to you about the project. Where does your brain go? Well, I know for me, when someone's like, hey, Danielle, can we talk? I'm like, oh, shoot, what did I do wrong? Which it could be something positive. It could be an opportunity to grow. So if you have kind of a negative association with feedback, we can start to work on being like, they're here to help. We're here to grow. So the actual definition of feedback is constructive suggestion to peers or managers, which is interesting that it's also to managers, or that the actual definition is that. But anyways, so it's constructive suggestions. The concept behind feedback is in order to help people improve, not to punish. So, I mean, here is a really interesting concept for not only people receiving feedback is not there to make someone feel bad about themselves or to punish. Feedback is an opportunity for all parties to grow together. So one of the things that I think can help build a community at work rather than a fear-based environment is being aware of how to provide feedback. In an ideal world, we would all be doing self-care. So we'd be sleeping enough, eating enough, exercising. And so, when we approach someone and we are starting to talk about feedback, everyone's in their best places. That's not always possible because of life. So one of the things that is very meaningful is to ask someone, hey, I was looking at that project and I'm curious if now is a good time to go over a couple of different questions that I have, or a couple different points of observation I have. If someone says no, that's okay. And you can say, when can we set up a meeting? So rather than just bombarding someone with your feedback, ask them. And if it is time sensitive, then you can say that, hey, this is time sensitive. Do you, how about in a half an hour when you can be present? The difference between just providing the feedback versus asking gives people some time to adjust and be in that right mindset. So that is helping promote their own self-care, as well as like getting you both on the same page. Oftentimes when we are providing feedback, if we haven't been trained to, because again, this isn't like a common discussion within most companies, is being really clear and focused on what you want to express to that person. So when we're providing feedback, and if there is emotional ties to it, or we're feeling very passionate, it is not uncommon to start to list off all the things that are going wrong. I giggled a little bit because I'm also thinking about having disagreements with your partners and how it is so easy to be talking about, not taking off your shoes at the front door, and then also getting pissed about the dishes in the sink and, that they haven't done the laundry or whatever. But what happens when we start to, let me ask, what happens if someone is just layering on all the difficulties and challenges and what they want to see improved? For me, immediately I shut down. You become defensive. Thank you, Trisha. Yeah, defensive. You can become rude or snarky. You stop listening. You walk away. It's too much for our brain to kind of take in. So, in an ideal world, you would listen to understand, as Jose said. But I think that kind of depends on how it's approached. And, personally, it can become really overwhelming if someone is just laundry listing everything that needs to be improved on. When you are providing that feedback, I really encourage people to be sincere and specific. So rather than being flippant with your words, really pause to consider how it's going to sound and be respectful and understanding. And I think that sometimes when we're frustrated and someone may be making the same errors over and over again, our approach can be frustrated. And at the same time, we have to give people the opportunity to grow. And so if we have not discussed it with them before, it is important to kind of let them catch up. And so pause, give the person some space to think about what you are saying. Another kind of step that can be offered is to provide a specific solution with steps if that is in your role. So if you are asking someone to check in with people following a meeting, let's say, I might say, hey, the expectation is that you write this email within 24 hours of the meeting. Is that feasible for you? How can I support you? So it kind of gives specific steps that you need to see happen in order for everyone to get on the same page versus like, you need to reach out to those people. Well, in an ideal world, that person would know what you meant, but a lot of times people can't read our brains. And so we do have to be more specific. And then this is kind of my favorite one, which is summarize it and then set up a time to discuss it again to help that person be held accountable. Because it's really easy to give the feedback and then just expect that person to get it done. And what can happen sometimes is that they're busy, they're not intentionally doing that, but they aren't able to maybe follow through in a way that you would like. And so if you just set up that like neat sandwich of, yep, I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about it and we're going to see how things are going, it really helps that person be accountable. So let's talk about accepting feedback. In an ideal world, everyone would see feedback as an opportunity to grow. But as I started to talk about in the first session, we don't know what that negative self-talk is for them. We don't know how their self-care is going or what's going on in their life. And, it can be overwhelming at first when we're starting to become more comfortable with feedback. So we're helping people provide feedback in a healthier manner. How can you accept it in a healthier manner? So, if you're anything like me, you kind of, when someone's like, oh, we need to talk, you might start to feel a little bit overwhelmed by it. Oh, yeah. Yep. So I try to, someone wrote, oh boy, in the chat. And yeah, so I'm, one of the things that we do when we're stressed is we hold our breath. And when we're holding our breath, we trigger our brain to do a more reactive response than thinking about it and being present. So the first thing I do is I tune into my breath and I make sure that I'm breathing. We want to keep our pulse down. We want to keep ourselves grounded. The more we can be connected with our breath, the better. Practice active listening. So when you are provided this feedback, say, hey, can I check in and make sure I understand? you said you wanted this information in 24 hours, but you emailed me in 12 hours. So help me understand. What is the time frame you need this information? Pause if you need to, take some notes, be curious. Yeah, that's an interesting point that you have. Who is ever giving you that feedback and ask, like, how have you seen me doing this? How would you like me to do this? And you're not saying it rudely, you just really want to know. Because a lot of times what can happen is there's a lot of communication barriers. And if we're not asking questions and present versus like holding our breath and going into our amygdala, which is our flight, fight, or freeze part of our brain, which can happen when we're holding our breath or we're triggered or activated, we forget to like be present and understand, which is why on both providing feedback and accepting feedback is schedule a follow-up. Give yourself a couple days, look back at your notes, see if there's information that's pertinent, see if there's questions that you have, and come back around to it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen really quickly. What I think is the most important piece of all of this is being aware of how your life is interconnected. And so if you are really overwhelmed outside of work, that is going to come into work. The more we are not taking care of ourselves, the less we're going to be able to hear feedback or provide healthy feedback. And feedback is an opportunity. So in an ideal world, and I'm gonna live in this ideal world, is that feedback really is so everyone works better together. The more we are individually aware of our own difficulties, the easier it is going to be for us to be aware of how we communicate, be aware of how we respond, and how we react. So I want to kind of encourage people to do 3 steps. The first step is start to incorporate some self-care. I know we're all really busy, but that is a really, really essential part to being our best selves. The next thing I want you guys to start to do is really be aware of that negative self-talk. So when you start to note negative self-talk, I want you to just say, there's some negative self-talk. Maybe that's not true. And see if you can kind of link it to difficulties that you're having when you're getting feedback. And the third thing I want you to do is practice receiving and giving feedback with each other in a non-threatening way. So start small and practice with those different steps that I gave you. I know I'm kind of making it out to see, oh, it's so simple, but the more we normalize and talk about our emotional well-being and how we communicate with others, the easier it is going to be for all of us to feel happier and healthier at work. I could talk forever on this subject, and I am right about out of time. So if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to pop them in this. So I believe that Andrea said that this recording will be available on the YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone.